Hey, welcome back to the Book of Dead Radio Show. I'm Dr. Robert Benson. As always, before we get started, we want to say thank you to Jehovah. Thank Him for His Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you for our families. Thank Him for work and our ability to do the things we're able to do. And I'm hanging out with my main man, Eddie Ice G, the engineer extraordinaire, the guy who runs the NASCA network, who has a great guest for us this evening. What's he say there, Eddie G? What's up, man?
Hey, brother. How you feeling, man? How you feeling?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great.
I'm energized today, my friend, because we have an exciting guest, a guy who you may be familiar with his silky voice and his history on the radio, Mr. Maurice Browne. Welcome to the show, Mr. Browne. It's good to have you here. Good to see you again. How's everything?
Everything's doing fine, and thank you for allowing me to participate in your program this evening.
Hey, Mr. Browne, I am so honored to have you on the show. We all have our soundtrack, if you will, of life. Being from where we're from, the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, I can tell you that your voice echoes in my memory as a part of my soundtrack of life. Talk about what it's like to be a part of a culture and be a part of what people remember in their consciousness just simply by your voice and your ability to share other people's experiences and those types of things.
Well, you know, it is one of the few jobs that I can ever think of that I really enjoyed, that I wouldn't have told my employees that I would have done it for free. But it's something that you really enjoy because you get a lot of feedback. First of all, you enjoy the interaction with the community, with the listeners, and you also hopefully enjoy the music. And the combination of the two make it well worth the experience. You get to go to different activities, you get to host shows. And back then when I first started, the money was very poor. You know, it was like minimum wage plus and just a little bit of plus. And most of your money was made outside of the station. And so so you had to enjoy it. And it was a lot of fun back then. That was back in the day. It was a lot of fun, 40, 50 years ago.
I see.
Well, you know, Mr. Browne, I know you've worked at a few stations, but the one that we're familiar with is WDAS and some of the Philadelphia area stations. And when we think about the music and we think about some of the different DJs that were there, Tony Brown, who is no relation, right? Mimi Brown, who's no relation. But tell us about some of the others and some of the history of WDAS.
Well, you know, we just want to mention that we have about every 3 months, we have a meeting, a luncheon of some of the old staff, you know, Doug Henderson. We have some of the engineers. We have some of the disc jockeys who were there. Charlie Brown was there. I've been trying to get Mimi there because she's been looking after her dad for a while. And we talk about what used to be, how it used to be. It used to be a lot of fun. You know, some of the folks still show up like Doug Henderson. It was a lot of fun back then, and that's what supplemented the money that we didn't get. Well, we did get, but the little bit of money we got. Because we had a lot of freedom. We had a lot of opportunity. We played just about what we wanted to play. There were some restrictions. There were some categories, but outside of that, we did have a lot of freedom of saying what we had wanted to say and introduce records and talk about folks, whether it's artists. Over the years, I've interviewed an enormous amount of folks, you know, and I had a lot of fun doing it, from Michael Jackson to Stevie Wonder to Maurice White, Gladys Knight. She was a lot of fun. Gladys was a lot of fun. I don't know if we have the time I can talk about. I'll say that real quickly. What happened was with Gladys Knight, when I was doing the interview with her, it was between two shows. She was doing 2 shows on a Saturday. And it was after the first show. I was with the producer, the record promoter. And he knocked on the door. So, you know, that's his job. And he was asking, you know, Gladys if I could do an interview. And she looked like, you've got to be, I just got off the stage. You had a robe on like you just got out the shower. And you asked me for it. She didn't say a word. She just, the looks say everything. Yeah. And she looked and she said, come on in. And couldn't stop her from talking. She talked for an hour. Kept on about everything. And those are the things you really appreciate. I think one of the best interviews that I always will remember was the interview I did with Phyllis Hyman. And this was the reason why she didn't give out interviews. The reason why I did a show on WDAS where we'd feature an artist, or I'd feature an artist for a couple of hours. And during that period of time that I was playing, I played the special on her. I played 2 hours of just her music. And she wasn't coming out with any albums at that time. And she said, the only reason why you're here is because I had no albums out and you played my music. You played 2 hours of my music. So that's why you're in my apartment. And I was there with the promoter and her friend. And she really talked about her life, the problems that she had in her life. And you know, she never drove. That's the reason why she lived close to 30th Street Station, so she could do shows in New York, so she can go to D.C., so she can take a train to Atlantic City. And she had a lot of problems. She had a psychologist, a psychiatrist. And she talked about that. I didn't ask those questions because I knew nothing about that. But I say all that to say those types of interviews, those type of people that you meet associated with radio, made it well worth the time. Of course, when you introduce shows and you're emceeing a show, that's where you make your extra money. Some will say, I'm sure not everybody reported it to the IRS. But anyway, I don't know if I can say that on radio. I'll pay the mortgage and the car note. It's past 7 years, so the IRS can't get. They can always get you. But anyway, so when we have these meetings, I keep going around in circles. When we have these meetings every 3 months, we talk about things like that, what we did in the studio, what no one knows happened in those studios, which some good, some interesting. But the people that you meet, the people who came through the studio, you know, I mean, you could be on the air and all of a sudden Cher walks by, you know, with her news record, you know, Take Me Home. I turn around, it's Cher, you know, or maybe one happens to be passing by because they passed by WDAS because that was the #1 black station in Philadelphia, and always usually 1, 2, or 3 in the city. So everybody came by that station, and hope that answers your question.
Hey, most certainly did. And the thing that's amazing to me is that you got a guy who's sitting on the other side of the interview scenario, if you will. But this is Book of Dad Radio Show. I'm Dr. Robert Benson with my main man, Eddie Ice G, and the great Maurice Browne. And when we come back, we're going to talk to him about a whole lot more. So sit tight and we'll be right back.
See why listeners from over 150 countries around the world follow the Book of Dad Radio Show. Join Dr. Robert Benson and Eddie G as they chat with special guests who share their stories and information that will change your life. Watch and listen on lifeandspiritonline.com or subscribe to the Book of Dad Radio Show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcast. Brought to you by the NASCA Network.
Hey, Book of Dad Radio Show. I'm Dr. Robert Benson with Eddie Ice G, and we're right back at you with Mr. Maurice Browne. And we're talking to a guy who was a part of radio history, if you will. But today, radio itself has evolved to the point where we're doing this interview the way we're doing it right now. We're face-to-face, we're talking to each other. Well, in the past, it wasn't quite that way. So, Maurice, we want to ask you a question about the evolution of radio now to where it is today. And I want you, if you could, use a foundation for answering this question by talking about Soul Train. We're all familiar with Soul Train back in the day because it was a national program back then versus how radio was more local then. Now we've evolved to this point where everything, it has the potential at least to be on a national level. But talk about Soul Train and how its impact kind of changed everything and brought the R&B flavor, if you will, on a national level versus just at the radio level.
When Soul Train was on, I remember I was in school. Everybody used to rush to the TV to watch Soul Train. It brought a lot of artists to life who would not normally have the kind of exposure necessary to progress in the field of entertainment. I mean, radio stations did it with, you had to get with the program director or you have to know somebody who's on the air. Soul Train opened up a lot of opportunities. And it helped hundreds of artists move forward in the field. I mean, different from radio from back in the day, you're talking about a couple of decades ago to today. Now in radio, you can't say what you want to. They tell you what to say. They say you when to say it. how long you have to say it. They pick the exact records that you have to play. Before it was local. In other words, WDAS used to play whatever what we thought was necessary at the station. Now you have a something like a Clear Channel that's on 1,000 stations. So rather than have individual program directors, they might have 5 program directors for 1,000 stations that set the parameters. That's for all the stations. That's the reason why you can go to New York or DC or Chicago or California and hear the same music. And that's what ruined, I think, a lot of the enterprise of radio. It was it's no longer independent. Because what plays in Philadelphia is close to New York, but what plays, I'm from New York. I was born in New York and I lived in New York for most of my young years. But what plays in New York does not play in Philadelphia. I've come to Philadelphia and people say, oh, that's a great record by such and such. And I've never heard that song before in my life. It was a #1 hit in Philly. The same thing happens with DC. So that no longer exists because all the stations started playing the same thing. You have these stations because back in the day, the FCC said you could only own 7 stations. Now companies own 1,000 stations. And that's the reason why people now go to Spotify, or they have their own little iPods or music devices in their cars because they don't want to hear the same music over and over again or go from city to city and it doesn't change. You don't have that kind of diversity. A lot has changed, but getting back to Soul Train, that's when opportunities for different artists really expanded, and it gave them more than just that local flavor. It gave them a national flavor. It gave them the exposure necessary to progress in life, in entertainment.
Well, you opened my eyes to something with that last statement, because radio, as you said, was local, which is what made the sound of Philadelphia what it was, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
It was able to transcend the local area and become international, but it still was grounded in Philadelphia. The artists and everything was grounded in Philadelphia. And as you said, when the conglomerates took over radio, it just became generic. So
That's a good one.
I like what you said about Spotify. And this is the reason that Spotify and Pandora, these guys are so successful, is because now I can listen to what I want to listen to. I'm not held hostage anymore by the conglomerate who is playing the same thing everywhere. I have choices now. And that's interesting when you think about how things have changed, but it comes back around to what the individual consumer wants, which is, I want to hear what I want to hear, not
Right.
what you want me to hear, to make it more of a commercial enterprise. So that's pretty interesting.
That's 100%.
That's very interesting. I'm sorry. That's a very interesting point, and it kind of makes me dig a little deeper into it too, where there's a term that used to be floated around called payola, where artists had people influencing people like yourself, Maurice. Can you talk a little bit about that term, and was it something that you ever had to deal with, the payola issue, if you will?
Just smiling.
I will say that personally, no. I'm not saying no because I'm trying to protect myself. No, I wasn't high up in the scale to dictate, even though I was sometimes I was offered suggestions as to what to play and their compensation for that. But there was a lot of payola. I mean, artists would have to pay the program director. I'm not speaking any particular radio station. We get that straight up front. Would pay the radio station program director or general manager, and all of a sudden you hear a record played on the air, which definitely shouldn't have. Or if it was a good record, that much the better. But that was really heavily, if you didn't pay the money, you had to pay to play. So you wanted to hear play on the radio, you had to pay the money.
Right.
And that's why most of the performers, most of the recording artists didn't make any money, because their agents had to pay the radio station in different radio stations throughout the nation, unless it was really big and it caught on and they had to play it. Mm-hmm. But it would just to get that initial start, because you got a lot of artists out there. But to get that start, you had to get that push. To hit the push, you need that money. I don't know whether that exists in the corporate life, so I can't address that either way. But it definitely was part of the environment for a long period of time.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah,
look,
that's
Maurice,
Yes.
it's like your electric bill. If you want electric, you got to pay, right? Hey, we're having a great conversation here with Maurice Browne, Dr. Robert Benson, and me, Eddie G. We're going to take a break and we're going to come back on the Book of Dad radio show and give you some more of this great content. Thanks.
You have something special. You have greatness in you. Hello, I'm Les Browne, Mrs. Mamie Brown's baby boy. I want you to spread the word to your family members and friends to listen to LesBrownGreatnessRadio.com. Absolutely. And let me share with you why we're going to be focusing on positive things, because whatever you focus on the longest becomes the strongest. And now more than ever, when the suicide rate has increased over 33%, when the suicide rate of young children between 5 and 11 has doubled, people feeling hopeless and stressed out and powerless. We need programming that can bring out the greatness in them. And that's what we will be focused on. When you listen, it will be an experience that will transform your life. LesBrownGreatnessRadio.com. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Hey, welcome back to the Book of Dad radio show with me, Eddie G, Dr. Robert Benson, and the great Maurice Browne. Hey, sir. Now, I've worked with this young man for many years, and, you know, I know his meticulous style of interview and the research that he does. I've learned a lot from him, as a matter of fact. Talk to us, Maurice, about some of your favorite interviews and some things that you'll never forget.
I'm looking here. I was trying to make a list real quickly of the people that I did interview. And I interviewed over 20 people. I can only think of about 10. It was Jeffrey Osborne, Michael Jackson, Gladys Knight, and the Pips. I'll say the Pips. I'll say that real quick about what happened after I interviewed Gladys Knight. The Pips were in a different room. And I said, I wanted to interview, blah, blah, blah. He said, fine. They were eating. I said, I'll come back when you finish eating. He said, no, sit down and eat. I said, I'm not hungry. He said, you want the interview, you sit down and eat. and all they did, I had the recorder, and all they did, they passed the mic between them because they knew the questions, they knew the answers to the questions everybody asked them, and I just ate. So interviewed Maurice White along with his brother. He came by the station. Rick James, Rick at a different time, Tina Marie, Stevie Wonder, Jeffrey Osborne. Jeffrey Osborne was a lot of fun. As I mentioned before, and Lou Rawls. When I interviewed Lou Rawls, it was nice. He made it sound like we knew each other for decades. Here with my man Maurice Browne. How you doing, my brother? I never met the man of my life. I try to make him sound comfortable. He made me feel comfortable.
Wow.
He was a nice guy. He was fun. Some people were just straight. You know, just answered your question and that's it. Like Tina Marie was like that. I'm not saying anything bad about the interview. She's no longer with us, but even if she was just straight. But some folks were a lot of fun. Maurice White was a lot of fun. I asked him why he stole my name, but he wouldn't answer that question. But you know, that was a large part of what we did at the station. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it helped supplement the money we didn't get directly in our paycheck. Seeing the artists, being with them, occasionally being invited personally to a party they were invited to. They were part of introducing them at an arena, and so all that was part of the enjoyment of being in radio. Now it's just a job for many of the people I spoke to, and I was in radio in a couple of places. Omaha, Nebraska, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Greensboro, North Carolina, and then back to Philly, because I was in TV for a period of time as a reporter and anchor. So, and in fact, I got into television because I got bored with radio. You couldn't do what I used to be able to do. I used to be able to feature an artist and spend as much time as I wanted to. Nobody bothered me because I had good ratings. if I wanted to feature, dynamic duos, Tina Marie and Rick James, or Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, or whatever I wanted to do, or do a special on Gladys Knight or whoever. But you can't do that. Now you're limited on, you're given instructions. You don't follow the instructions, there's the door.
The thing I noticed is that, as you mentioned before, and it's not always about the money. It's really about doing what you love doing, but you got to bring the ends together. As simple as that. Now, because of that, needing to bring the ends together, you've branched off and you actually work for the Philadelphia Housing Authority. Talk about how you use your skill set in the media to allow you to be successful working for the Housing Authority. What exactly did that look like for you?
Well, I was with the Housing Authority for almost about 15 years. And what got me into the way I could use my talents in the Philadelphia Housing Authority is dealing with people. Whenever you have an association when you're in radio, you're always with folks, whether you're at a club, you're spinning records, or you're announcing, or you're at a coliseum someplace. You use that same type of talent when you're talking to residents. It's different. People are basically the same. And you learn how to interact with them. You're trying to get, information from them that helps the authority, that helps them. And so you talk to them, you interview them. So interviewing became very easy. It's just a conversation can turn into an interview. They don't know that, but you're trying to get information that helps them and helps the authority. It helps their housing. It helps their future, their education, their environment, and the problems that they have, and how I can bring that back to the authority and say, there's a problem here that the residents are having, and at least I can, address that, or at least they can address it, at least I can bring it to them. So it's the talent of meeting people, talking to people, and being able to associate with them. And it was very easy to talk to folks because of the experience I had in radio. And that's, I think, benefited the authority. Did a lot of videos, which Ed Groves helped me with a lot, with the authority, talking, interviewing different residents and the higher ups, the CEO. And I think it advanced the authority, and it helped advance the residents at the authority.
I see.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
You reminded me of something. We worked in television together too. Maurice Browne was a great news anchor for Philly TV wow. News. And wow, I don't know why I forgot about that, but that was great. We did a lot of things together. That's how I know how professional, meticulous, and great this guy is. And I gotta throw something at you. Today, I was talking to the bank, right? And the customer service guy, he was talking to me like, "Hey, thank you very much." I said, "Man, this guy, he sounds like Maurice Browne, man." So I told him, I said, "Hey, man, you could have a career in radio." I says, "I work in radio, and I've heard some great voices, man, but you sound like you have a good voice." So he's like, "Oh, thanks a lot, man." I was hoping it wasn't getting recorded and he's going to get fired because he's going to leave and go on the radio, but right. I'm going to blame that on you, Maurice.
No, it was a good time we had at the radio, at the TV station. And again, getting into TV to begin with was because they had changed so much in radio. I figured, well, what's the next step? I'll say this briefly. Getting into TV, I had no experience in television whatsoever. And what you have to do in television is interview people. You're doing a story. And I worked for, I can't think of the cable station. They didn't pay anything. I just did it for the experience in Philadelphia. The interview, I had a little small newscast. And I'd do a stand-up, and people would be watching. And it would really bother me. I would look like, mind your business. I wouldn't say it. You couldn't else to do, so look at me. And I'd get all tensed up. And I'd be doing 3 takes, 10 takes. And finally, the guy would say, "Look, you do the next take or we're going to dump the story." And you get into a habit of just saying you got to disregard them, thinking them as something else, pets or something that doesn't bother you, and talk. But it wasn't easy to get into TV. Once you get in TV, though, it wasn't as fun as radio. That's more work. But it was also enjoyable. But that's bouncing off of what it said.
Well, Maurice, the thing that's great about it is that, a guy that's as multi-talented as yourself and has many different sides, what side are you using right now? What are you actually into these days? What can we look for from you or tune in to you that you're doing right now?
Well, right now, I just started a few months ago. I'm working at WRTI, which is a jazz classical station in Philadelphia. I do one show on a Sunday night where I play jazz. And I didn't know much about jazz. I was in DAS, another station in Omaha, Nebraska, but I really wasn't into that much jazz. So I learned a lot in a very short period of time. And so that's what I'm doing, basically, as well as doing some videography for different companies. I also do photography, but that's what's happening right now. Once a week, WRTI, Sunday night.
Wow. Hey, Maurice, there's just not enough time to get with you, so you got to come back. You got this open invitation. We definitely want to see you back on the Book of Dad radio show, without a doubt. Eddie G.
That's it. Hey, Maurice, I appreciate you jumping on. What was that, sir?
I was going to say thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Robert Benson. It's been a pleasure seeing you once again.
All right.
Mr. Eddie Grove, we've known each other for over 20 years, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you and professionally and personally. And I like the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity of even addressing your clientele, your listeners, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I don't know anybody could have said any better than that. So I'm going to say this is that be around people who do great things and you'll always be successful yourself. Be litmus paper because I'm around folks like these guys here. It's been Book of Dad radio show, hanging out with my main man, Eddie G. And thank you so much, Mr. Maurice Browne. I've learned so much from you today. You have absolutely no idea. Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you next time.